Last week, George Floyd was murdered by a United States police officer. The officer in question had a knee over his neck for 9 minutes while he couldn't breathe. George was begging for his life. It started mass protests across the United States. Largely peaceful. Their protests often turning into riots and looting after the police fanning the flames. Tools for the racism and the prejudice that unfortunately a lot of police officers have shown to have had in the United States. It's disgusting. And quite rightly, it had become the biggest story in world news. It's been horrific to watch in the last 3 or 4 days, seeing what has happened in the United States and the protests that have happened afterwards. People are protesting because we were told to be peaceful. We were told to protest in a certain way, and that's not worked. People are taking to the streets and are being the way they are because they feel like they have no other option. That their peaceful protests have not been listened to by people in charge. And it's disgraceful. I will talk about sports in a minute. But as a black man, as a black British man, I feel like I have to speak out on the platform that I'm blessed with because silence is complicit in this scenario and in this situation. And I wanted to talk about it because it needs to be spoken about more. It angers me that it's even gotten to this point, but certain elements need to be addressed right here and now. Because there is a crossover between this and motorsport. One of my best friends and my co-presenter on Motorsport 101, Ryan King, put out a thread yesterday talking about his experience of racism in motorsport, going to racetracks and being judged. Excuse me. And how the nature of being black incited fear, didn't make him comfortable in an environment where he should be, following the sport that he loves. F1 is not immune to this. I grew up watching the 2008 Spanish Grand Prix when a subsection of Spanish fans blacked their faces up and fired racist abuse at Lewis Hamilton because he was made to be the subject of blame for Fernando Alonso walking away from McLaren and not winning the World Championship by a single point the previous year. The race was threatened to be taken away from Spain. But it was barefaced racism for the world to see on a global stage. Me personally, I've experienced copious amounts of racist abuse on this platform. I've been a part of, you could say, F1's rise on social media for 10 years now. I had a Twitter account predominantly focused on F1 since 2010. Just when the sport was starting to get a footprint in the world of social media, a sport that didn't really have any platform for it until people like me started making videos on the subject back in 2010, back in the first couple of years of this past decade. The amount of times I've been racially abused on social media for being black, for being a fan of Sebastian Vettel, the words Nazi being thrown around regarding him and Nico Rosberg. Germans and good people that have won world championships and being judged purely because of their background, and xenophobic abuse has come along with it. Lewis Hamilton has created a very, very murky grey area with his presence on social media, where people will find the most nitpicky and stupid reasons to find a way to dislike the man, thinly veiled as racism. Don't get me wrong, Lewis is not a saint. He has absolutely put his foot on it on a few occasions when it comes to how he's handled the media and how he's spoken out in public. But the code that is often used to discuss Lewis Hamilton in terms of his fashion or in terms of his hair or in terms of his mannerisms and how he behaves, are all thinly veiled racist jabs that I personally have suffered in many walks of life as I've grown up. I've had it before in workplaces. I used to work in a Matalan, and one of my managers in there once said, "Dre, you're not black, you're red. You're so well spoken for a black guy." That's the sort of jabs we talk about when it comes to Lewis on the internet that happens on a constant basis, that we have largely ignored as a community. I've been there, I've seen it, I've breathed it, and I've lived it, that this space can be as racist as any others. And it's hard because we have to look to Lewis sometimes, and it shouldn't have to come to this. This is the point I'm going to allude to. Lewis Hamilton has been the prominent leader in talking about social issues in and out of Formula One from within F1 itself for years. He talked about the environment as early as 2017, and we mocked him for it. He was surrounded by a fleet of trash bags cleaning up where he was staying on holiday, and we mocked him for it. We turned it into a meme. He spoke about it extensively last year. He sold his private jet, realising the damage it was doing, and announced he was going to open a chain of vegan restaurants and promoted cleaner eating. He was largely mocked for it. Was spoken about virtue signaling. Was looking for a pat on the back from people. We didn't take him seriously until this happened, and it sucks. I get it. We're very lucky to have Lewis Hamilton. He is the most recognisable Formula One driver since Schumacher. He has the most social outreach, probably of any F1 driver ever. I've said it on numerous occasions. He's taken the sport to places, to areas, to walks of life to which it has never been. He gets to hang out with Drake and Post Malone and Kanye West and tap into Americana, tap into places of culture that Formula One has never reached before. We're very, very lucky to have someone like that in our space. We're very lucky to have it because F1 is one of the most insular bubble sports I've ever seen. I use bubble because it's almost like everything outside of its world is separate. I remember we raced in this is the sport that races in Bahrain, a country that didn't give women the right to vote until the earliest part of the 21st century. We race in Baku, a dictatorship, We raced in Bahrain when there was literally war protests going on outside the track. But as Eddie Jordan said in his BBC promo in 2012, the old director stood firm. Hamilton's always led this fight. And that's part of the problem. Black people have been screaming about this from the rooftops for years and years and years. He can't do it on his own. Black people can't do this on their own. And unfortunately, he's screaming from the rooftops in a white, male-dominated sport. You ask anyone that goes to a Formula One media centre, it is 90% white men. You walk into any paddock, and it's largely white men. Lewis Hamilton's been a part of Formula One for 13 years now. If anyone knows the state of an F1 paddock, it's him. That shouldn't be questioned. If he's saying it, it's a fact. He's been in it, he's lived it, he's breathed it too. And F1 has an inherent amount of built-in bias where its drivers can stick its head in the sand. Where they don't have to comment on social issues outside of their own sport. And that's what makes it so annoying and frustrating and difficult, because Hamilton was willing to put his own reputation on the line to say Black Lives Matter and to push for social justice and not be called a warrior for it on the internet. But that's part of the problem. We need more white people to speak up on our behalf, because white people are in the prominent positions of power within our sports, within life in general. The world is run by white people. I know people have put pressure on drivers to speak out about this. Because unfortunately, whether we want to or not, these drivers are looked at as role models. And it shouldn't have to come down to Hamilton to lead that fight. And it's brutal and it sucks that it's gotten to this point. But here we are. It's actually kind of shit because Hamilton's spoken out and had spoken out about it on his Twitter and Instagram for a day and a half. And only last night have we seen more comments from fellow drivers like Charles Leclerc and George Russell and Carlos Sainz, who speaks from an air of hypocrisy given the awful xenophobic joke he made about China during on Instagram during the lockdown. And it almost feels disingenuous because Hamilton was so fast to jump on this. And jump on this probably isn't the right word or the right term. But he was the first to address this. And because everyone has been so quiet for a day, 2 days now, it almost feels like Hamilton has guilt-tripped them into commenting. Are we that afraid? Are we that afraid to speak out? Are we that afraid of pissing off our sponsors or promoters? Saying you're anti-racist should never be controversial. Why is it controversial in this sport to speak out against racism? Why is it deemed to be risky? Are we afraid of pissing off fans that are racist too? Because I've seen it and I've lived it and I've breathed it on this space, and they very much exist. Saying you're anti-racist on this platform should not be deemed as controversial. It should be the status quo. It should be the bare minimum required to come across as a halfway decent human being. And that is why I'm not silent, and that is why Hamilton is not silent, and that is why these drivers should not be silent. Because silence is complicity in this scenario. A lot of these people share paddocks with Lewis, a guy that has been racially abused on social media, that has been racially abused in his line of work and in his job, and is actually a lot more commonplace in sports than we give it credit for. And then when we end up sitting down and talking about it and debating it, the goalposts get shifted. We don't end up talking about it. When Colin Kaepernick took that knee, protesting police brutality in the NFL, people didn't start talking about police brutality in the US. The rhetoric changed. The narrative changed. Instead of it being about police brutality, people sat down and talked about the flag. They talked about, should we stand for the national anthem? Should we respect the troops? The same troops that often sacrifice their lives to give people the choice as to whether to protest or not. He was told that this wasn't the right way to do it. What is the right way to protest? Because they'd rather keep black people quiet. That's just the simple matter of it. And it sucks it's gotten to this point. We need people that are white to use their platforms and positions to speak out against this, because it is not going to change from us, the minorities themselves. And this sport can do a lot better. This environment that I am in can do better. We can be better. And we need to encourage more white people to speak out and to use their profiles for change, because it's never going to come directly from people like me. I was mentally exhausted having to explain to people like Will Buxton last night, F1's most prominent presenter on its own social media platforms, who turned Hamilton's call to action on Instagram into an ego riding trip, talking about his own, his own, like, oh, look at me, Jack, I did this. This is about me. And I hated it, because you shouldn't be looking to support black people to get a pat on the back or to come with an asterisk. Supporting black people shouldn't be a matter of trying to get validation by putting it on public on your own Instagram page. It's the bare minimum to be a decent human being. And this is the environment that I've chosen to be a part of. And it frustrates me no end that this keeps happening. There's some links below in the description to places you can donate and how you can help. Please, people, I beg of you, do what you can. Because this is not going to change anytime soon. And the only way any change is ever going to happen is if we all come together and speak out. It shouldn't have to come down to people like me and people like Lewis Hamilton in our space to do this. Being anti-racist in Formula 1, it should never be controversial. It should never be a stance that's considered risky. And until that perception goes away, it's never going to get any better. Thanks for watching.